Hey, everybody, welcome back to the strategy session with Lincoln Square. Proud to be joined, as always, by my good friend Stuart Stevens and a special guest tonight, Michael Fanone. You know him from his work in trying to highlight the January 6th attack on the Capitol and the attack and assault on police officers. And while Michael is driving, we're going to let him keep his eyes on the road. But thank you for joining us, brother. And I'm really excited that you're going to be hosting a new series here on Lincoln Square, Protect and Serve with Maya May. Talk to us about what the show is about, and about with your enormous experience in police work and as a cop, at the weird moment that America's law enforcement officers find themselves in right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm really excited about the project as well. I love Maya May, and I love pretty much everything that you guys are doing, or everything you guys are doing at Lincoln Square Media. So I'm glad to be a part of the team. But this has been a passion project of mine. I mean, I've gotten pigeonholed in the January 6th conversation, and I think a
Yeah.
lot of people forget that I had a 20-year career in law enforcement prior to
Right.
that, which I can speak to with a whole hell of a lot more credibility than, just one day in a again, 2-decade career in policing.
Right.
I think it's incredibly important. It's especially in this moment, and we're seeing, how we're seeing law enforcement being utilized under this administration, how, what are the long-term effects of the Trump administration's use of police and federal agents. What are the long
Right.
term effects of them, transitioning from, taking federal agents off of their important investigations and retasking them with focusing on apprehending um, you know individuals that may or may not be in this country illegally. You
Yeah.
know what are those what is that going to look like? What is the relationship between law enforcement and the American people going to look like going forward? I mean, listen, I thought things were really bad during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2015,
Hmm.
2016, 2017, and up to 2020. Having the benefit of being outside of the law enforcement echo chamber and talking to people, both still in the profession, but also, people that are, witnessing the way that law enforcement has been perverted by this administration. I think things are 100 times worse. And I think it's going to take decades to repair that relationship, if it ever is.
I think that's a really, I think, and again, as you mentioned, your perspective on this is more than that one day. You've been on the streets of DC. I mean, with the deployment of the National Guard to DC and the federalization of all these National Guard folks in LA and there, and also, as you point out, the deployment of FBI and everybody else into jobs that aren't their real job, that aren't their real law enforcement role, gearing them up with all the tactical stuff and throwing them into the streets. It really does, like, it's almost the exact opposite of the kind of thing where you go into communities and build relationships with local folks, local leaders as cops, and try to become a stabilizing force rather than a destabilizing force.
Correct. I mean, all of this, now we have the benefit of seeing what a 30 or 45-day occupation of a major metropolitan city in Washington, D.C. looks like, in
Right.
that, we we saw troops deployed to Washington, D.C. We saw, an amass of federal agents sent to Washington, D.C. And, when it comes to um, the National Guard, I mean, this is purely performative. It's all
Yeah, of
theatrical.
course. Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing that National Guard troops can do to enhance public safety, other than be a physical presence, a short-term deterrent. But I would even argue that it's not a deterrent, it's just simply displacement, because as we all know, crime continued to occur within Washington, D.C. but obviously criminals are not going to commit crimes in places where there's an overabundance of, uniformed, whether it's federal
Right.
troops or whether it's, law enforcement officers. And then the second component there is, the fact that we had this influx of federal resources into the city. Now, I use that term loosely because I worked as a task force officer when I was at the Metropolitan Police Department. I worked
Right.
in small mission units that focused on violent crime and
Hmm.
narcotics trafficking. And I worked as a task force officer assigned with the ATF, with the DEA time, and then finally with the FBI for the longest period of time. And those working relationships are incredibly beneficial. The idea behind those partnerships is that the feds bring financial resources, investigative tools, investigative capabilities that are
Hmm.
not accessible to local law enforcement. And then local law enforcement brings a knowledge of the community, a knowledge of who the criminal actors are, and so bringing those two things together to enhance investigations, to surgically remove criminals from the streets, rather than going out and using some of the more archaic tactics of jump out style policing, which I used earlier in my career because it was all that
Right.
was available to us. And
Hmm.
and what I found in my professional experiences, you stop 100 people, one of the guys has a gun on him, you make that arrest, and you've also pissed off 99 other people that weren't doing anything fucking wrong in the process. And
Right.
and now going forward, if you need one of those 99 people to be a witness, to cooperate with law enforcement, to provide
Hmm.
information, you're not going to get it
Good luck.
because you've
Yeah.
exactly. And so that's we saw these resources come into Washington, D.C., to the Metropolitan Police Department, but they weren't used in an investigative capacity. You're taking career FBI agents off of incredibly important cases, whether it's national security cases, whether it's, human trafficking, narcotics trafficking, and you're having them walk essentially a footbeat in neighborhoods and do proactive, pretextual stops on individuals. I mean, essentially going out and just casting a wide net in the same manner that I just described, pissing off the community, not doing anything uh, really to combat crime or enhance public safety in the long term. And then going even further, we saw the results of all this. It was several thousand arrests, 80% of which were bullshit,
Right.
misdemeanor crimes, quality of life crimes. And the other 20%, while they were taking guns off the street, I would argue that that's the normal capabilities of the Metropolitan Police Department without all of these assets. And then we started seeing things that were, even more telling. We saw grand juries failing to indict cases.
Hmm.
One, I would say, is because they don't trust the police. I think that's a component of it, but I think also the other component there is, they see that these cases that are being brought are, fraught with uh, Fourth Amendment issues, Fifth Amendment issues, and so they're failing to indict. And I mean, the old adage of being able to indict a ham sandwich.
Right.
I mean, that was my experience. And so if Janine Pirro and, Pam Bondi can't indict a ham sandwich, that's problematic. Um, and then going even further, I read a Washington Post article, I think it was beginning of last week or the week before, in which a judge who I was familiar with,
Hmm.
Zia Farquhar, who, was a U.S. Prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. when I was there as a cop, somebody that I would describe as government friendly, at
Right.
least was prior to this administration, describing an arrest as one of the most egregious and aggressive violations of an American citizen's Fourth Amendment rights that he had ever witnessed in his time, as both a federal prosecutor and a federal judge.
Mm.
And that's the type of cases that are being produced by this administration's influx of federal resources. And so,
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say now at the end of 30, 45 days, this administration did absolutely nothing to enhance the safety and security of uh, the residents of the District of Columbia, and in proceeding the way that they did, destroyed a relationship between the local police department and the communities that they are entrusted with protecting.
Stuart?
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to the show. Maya May is just
Oh, she's awesome.
force
Yeah, yeah.
of nature. You know, my dad was an FBI agent, Michael, and I'd be really curious to see hear your take on what you think is happening inside the FBI now. You must know so many of these agents, and it just seems from the outside that morale must be just plummeting. But you tell me, what are you seeing and hearing?
I mean, the few guys and gals that I still talk to that are still there that weren't purged because they investigated, insurrectionists that assaulted police officers on January 6th, they're scared, they're afraid, and agents, and this is true in the greater law enforcement community as well. Agents and officers are just trying to make it to retirement. If I hear that, if I had a nickel for every time somebody has told me that in the past several months, I wouldn't need to do a podcast with Maya May. I'd be independently wealthy.
Right.
These guys, they're, and this is a career that most would continue on beyond the
Right.
minimum age of retirement. I mean, at almost every federal agent I knew, even after they surpassed the maximum, age allowed, they would come back in some type of a consultant's
Sure.
capacity because they love the work and they love the people. And that's just not what we're seeing today. And, I think Kash Patel said it best. It's going to take 14 years to restore the FBI to the numbers that it was prior to the arrival of this administration,
It's
which
crazy.
that is insane.
Well, let me ask you this, Michael, because stepping out of the immediate policing role, one of the things I think that's most pernicious in this country right now is that we've kind of mainstreamed corruption at the highest levels. And the story that I think everybody's been talking about this week is that Tom Homan, when he was known to have, be coming in as a senior DHS person, accepted a $50,000 bribe delivered to him in a Kava restaurant bag. I don't know about you guys, but I've never been paid $50,000 in a restaurant bag for anything I've ever done. But I'm curious. It's like that corruption, and the guy just walks. The administration just goes, nope, not doing it. Isn't that more corrosive in a lot of ways than even the sort of like I think they have a mistaken street level law enforcement strategy. I think you'd probably agree with that. But permitting and allowing the corruption and the protection of bad guys at every level, I think that is almost more dangerous to us as a country because there is no Department of Justice anymore that will prosecute those cases.
Yes, and I try when I have conversations about law enforcement, circa this administration, Trump 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
I always try to make it clear that ICE is something completely unrecognizable to me as a career police officer. I mean, this is an agency, again, like you said, I mean, essentially is being run by Tom Homan. And, the $50,000 bribe allegations are, I mean, to me, really just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this is a person who's had, I mean, I'll be generous and say he's had a storied career in law enforcement. And and it ain't a good one. It's the typical good old boy, racist cop. And so, I see him as he's a corrupt leader of what is becoming a corrupt agency that is not accountable to the American people. It is only accountable to Donald Trump. And, I'm not condemning each and every agent. You know, some who have been there obviously prior to the arrival of this administration, but I would encourage them to quit. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say about that agency other than, you know, it doesn't resemble anything that I've come to understand as an American law enforcement agency. I mean, and I'll give some examples. You know,
Yeah.
there was a situation that I saw in on social media that I think went viral, and there was this young lady, and she's running for Congress in Illinois' ninth district. I forget her name, but you know, I think she's in her late 20s, and she was protesting at an ICE facility in Chicago,
Right.
and she was doing what I, you know, so many other protesters have done for decades in this country, and that's, you know, blocking the passage of a vehicle by sitting down on the ground. And if you watch the video play out, you know, this agent comes over and he picks her up, and she's, you know, petite, and carries her out of the way of the vehicle and then slams her to the ground in a pretty brutal fashion. And now, as somebody who spent, you know, a good amount of time working these types of events as a cop, you know that, you know, the way you handle protesters is you give them 3 warnings. That, you know, this is most departments' policy. I think at some levels it's law, but you give them warnings. You let them know that, you know, if they violate the final warning, they're going to be arrested, and then you take them into custody. I mean, she wasn't actively resisting, as so many other, you know, instances in which we've seen these ICE agents or whoever the hell they are. They're, you know, wearing masks, interacting with the American public who has rights. You know, these protesters have rights, and you can't just pick them up and slam them to the ground and then move on like nothing happened. Um, you know, typically, if you're going to use that level of force, you would expect some type of arrest to follow. Like, why did this agent feel that he needed to use this level of force?
Yeah.
You know, why wasn't she taken into custody? I mean, those are all huge red flags for me. And but we see it play out now time and time and time again. And then I talk to people on the ground that have experienced this, and they're, you know, I've asked them, like, have you tried to file some type of a complaint? And they're not being allowed to go into ICE facilities to file a complaint. And then when they contact local law enforcement, as was the case with several people I spoke to in Los Angeles, local law enforcement was telling them that ICE is not cooperating with them, and they're not providing them the identities of these agents so that a complaint can be lodged. And so again, you know, you return to this idea that you have an agency now that is unaccountable to the American people, and acting with impunity. Um, which it should be terrifying to every American.
Yeah. Michael? What do you think of what they're doing out in California, passing this legislation about ICE agents being required to identify themselves? And I think part of it is not be masked unless there's some specific need to be masked.
I mean, like, I, I applaud at this point, at this stage of the game, I applaud anybody for doing anything. Um, and so, you know, I I think it's good that they would pass a law like that, only because I fully expect, as you know, the administration has now said that that they're not going to abide by that, and it's just another example of, you know, this particular federal agency refusing to comply with, you know, with any other means to hold them accountable. I mean, I think, you know, again, drawing from my law enforcement experience, this argument that wearing a mask is somehow protecting these agents from, doxing or, um, whatever other threats, may exist, which, we still haven't seen any statistics to justify, this increase, what the administration is describing as a, 1,000% increase in threats to ICE agents. Well, what does that look like? Was there 5 before and now there's 50?
Right.
We don't have any numbers from the administration. And to be honest with you, I would have a difficult time trusting anything that came from them anyways. But my argument is, if masks protect agents, then why aren't the other 130,000 federal agents in this country allowed to wear masks as well? I think that's total bullshit. But my other argument would be that this is America. And in a democracy, if we're going to have a democracy, law enforcement agencies have to be accountable to the
Right.
American people. And one way that you can be held accountable is to identify the agent that you're interacting with in a particular situation. I know that law enforcement agencies have a great deal of resources that they can bring to bear to keep their agents safe and their officers safe, much more than the general public. Certainly much more than you or I have to protect ourselves from masked federal agents.
Right.
So again, my argument here is that you've got to weigh things like the Constitution and accountability with, temporary solution to, what a perceived or an alleged problem that they still haven't provided any evidence to support.
We've been watching a lot of these tensions about what we are as Americans, what this country is, how it's going to be governed, what we're going to stand for as a people. And one of those questions that's played out in the last week in the wake of the Kurt killing was this very heavy-handed federal effort to shut down Jimmy Kimmel by using Brendan Carr at the FCC and strong-arming Disney, who gave in almost immediately and took them a few days of getting their head beat by the market to come back on it. But I want to ask both of you. I'll start with you, Stuart. Talk to me about where you see that fight and why that is emblematic of something much bigger and I think more pernicious about this administration.
What just astounds me about this is this all done as if they think that the other party will never be in power, or if the other party was in power, that they would be governed by principles that they themselves have rejected.
Right.
Which, it reminds me about, what was it that Bomber Harris said about Germany in World War II? They had the childish notion that they could bomb and that they wouldn't be bombed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were going to use this metric to use the FCC to shut down these bad actors, I mean, the case in point would be Fox News and Newsmax, which we know are lying. And they've admitted that they lied. And they've had a legal process that ended in them paying, nearly billions of dollars, or over billions combined.
Billion.
Damages. So, I mean, Jimmy Kimmel's a joke, or, I don't like the joke. You think it's bad. I mean, comics are in the business of offending. I mean, that's
sure.
And you want to use this? It just seems, and I think it happens because somebody like Brendan Carr is so eager to please Trump. And, it reminds me of that episode of Sopranos where those two guys who wanted to get in with Tony went out and whacked somebody. Just
right.
Like, see, it's great. And he was like, guys, that's not so good. So I don't know. I think it's a complete collapse of Republican Party. And, Michael, Rick and I worked in the Republican Party for a long time. It really doesn't see itself anymore as a governing party, because the essence of governing is compromise. The essence of governing is admitting that other side has valid viewpoints. And that's become just a sign of complete weakness, which to me, you can't operate a democracy in that kind of dynamic, just as you can't operate a democracy if somebody's not willing to admit they lost an election. That's the essence of having an election. Somebody's got to lose.
It's insane to me. But Michael, what's your take on that?
I mean, and speaking, you were saying about the Republican Party, like I'm not a particularly well-educated person, and I was a high school dropout, but what drew me to the Republican Party was one simple premise, which was, limited government and limited intrusion into individual, average, everyday Americans' lives. And now we're seeing a complete course correction or reverse of that principle, in that, everything that Donald Trump did, it accused everyone of being prior, not even just Democrats, but previous Republicans,
Sure.
of this over intrusiveness. He is now overly intruding upon his average everyday Americans, under the guise of I'm really targeting my political enemies, and he's saying all the quiet parts out loud. The Jimmy Kimmel thing, I think, I agree. I think Carr was trying to please Trump. I think that, obviously he ended up with egg on his face, in
Right.
that, the American people. And I mean, this is, not to get too off topic, but as somebody who every single day wakes up questioning what can we do in this moment? Like, the American people showed that there are things that they could do to push back. Whether it's, pushing back against politically motivated, you know, law enforcement activities, and not indicting cases, or, whether it's boycotting entities that they see as, you know, politically persecuting people for their, First Amendment rights, like Jimmy Kimmel, and boycotting them to the tune of, I think it was like, what, close to $4 billion that
Yep.
Disney and their network lost. And so I think, those are good examples of the fact that, the people still do have the power, and they need to exercise it, especially in this moment. But
Yep.
I also see, like, the Republican Party certainly has a monopoly in this moment on hypocrisy. You talk about, the accusations of, you know, the idea that calling somebody who displays fascist behavior a fascist is insightful, but then coming out and saying, um, we are going to destroy the enemy from within. We are going
Right.
to bring to bear all of the resources of the federal government and this administration to destroy them and purge them from get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
People aren't that stupid.
No.
And they see it for what it is. It's a shame that, I told you guys offline, I forced myself on my, YouTube show. I'm doing an episode about the Charlie Kirk Memorial Service, specifically focusing on the media's coverage, and having to sit through, I watched it 3 times,
Ooh,
on CBS,
better
on the
you than me. Whew.
CNN and Fox, just to see the different, coverage.
Right.
But, not surprising to me, uh, no pushback whatsoever, specifically during Stephen Miller's speech, and Donald Trump's speech, which were sick, deranged. I would go beyond using the language of insightful, and I would actually say that it was advocating for political violence. And
Yep.
to sit through that as somebody who is a victim of political violence myself, and see these, major industry, entities like CNN say nothing
Right.
other than, it was just over and over again. Like, I can't imagine the grief that the people in this room are feeling. Um, I, it just, it's,
It did strike me though that there was one part of it that was the memorial side of it, and then there was the political showcase. And Stuart, I want to
yes.
ask you this question, Stuart, before we wrap up here today. Didn't some of this feel like 2028 tryouts You had Vance, you had Rubio, you have all these influencers all trying to make their bones at this thing. I thought it was unseemly how, I mean, the widow walking out to fireworks is not a look that I expected.
Yeah. I mean, where to begin? They sense Trump is very weak, and they sense that Trump is losing it. Right. And they see it up close if you're J.D. Vance or Rubio. And I think that they are clearly positioning themselves for a post-Trump world. Yeah. And it is completely, reflective of the fact that they have no purpose of being in government other than trying to advance themselves.
Right.
And, Marco Rubio is the perfect example of this.
Sure.
He's up there talking about how need to deport American citizens who have criminal records, these bad, and his brother-in-law is a Cuban-born convicted narco cartel dealer.
Right.
Who, I mean, lived.
Call me crazy. Should we go visit him, Marco?
That his mom lived with, and I kind of like the world where you could be that, and then you could get out, and you could go on and have a life if you were willing to play by the rules. So anyway, I don't think these are very attractive people. I don't think that they're stars in any way. They're able to fill a certain space now because of their positions. Mm-hmm. But if I had to bet who would be the Republican nominee, I assume it would be J.D. Vance. Every Republican, every incumbent vice president who's run for the nomination has won the nomination. This is one of those things that may be true until it's not true. Doesn't mean they win the election, but they have
exactly. Well, look, folks, I want to encourage you to tune in to Michael's new show with Maya May, Protect and Serve. It is going to get deep, and it's going to have a lot of real world insights into what's happening in this country with law enforcement and our society and our culture. You can check out Stuart on MSNBC seemingly every 5 minutes. You can check out other Lincoln Square stuff that's out there. We've got the Trippy Show. We've got Punching Up with Maya May. We have got lives going on all the time. And you can check me out at The Rick Wilson on Substack and on the Lincoln Project podcast and the Enemies List podcast. And on Fridays, you get both the Elephant in the Room, which is a little 15-minute mini pod, peeling back the layers of what's going on this week politically, and Behind the Numbers with the Wilsons, where my son Andrew and I, who is a brilliant young pollster, tear it up and talk about where the numbers are. And this week is going to get lit. All right. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Stuart. We'll see you guys again next time. Tune into Lincoln Square, folks. We'll see you soon.
Thank you both. Thank you, guys. My pleasure.
All right, buddy.